Good morning, welcome. My name is Sarah Barnes and I work with the Maternal Health Initiative here at the Wilson Center. Today, MHI is very pleased to partner with Women in Public Service Project and with a wonderful team at Plan International, particularly our moderator for today, Justin Fugel. Together, we bring you this very important discussion on PEPFAR's dreams, gender innovations, and results. I also want to welcome our esteemed panelists and welcome Ambassador Burks back to the Wilson Center. As many of you know, the Wilson Center serves as a living memorial to President Wilson, the only president to receive a PhD. It's a very exciting time, as you can see by our new banners. We are beginning our 50th anniversary year. Today it is my great pleasure to be a part of the critical conversation around reproductive health, HIV/AIDS, empowerment, and the rights of women and girls. And with more than 330 RSVPs for this event, it is clear how important these issues are to us all. So I just wanted to give a little bit of information for those people who are watching the live stream today. Feel free to use Twitter hashtags, #MHDialogue and #GenderEqualityIs, and you can send in comments and questions. So without further ado, please let me turn the event over to Plan International's Senior Vice President of Programs and Policy, John Glover. Thank you.
A very good morning. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us here today for this Plan and Wilson policy event. I've recently joined Plan, so I'm very new to the organization, and it's a great honor to have this mark my first public representation of Plan. This marks the 4th policy event that Plan and the Wilson Center have co-hosted since last January. And I'd like to especially thank Gwen Young and Sarah Barnes for this continued partnership and for hosting this event. Clearly, it's well attended and it's well appreciated. All of our events have focused so far on gender policy, women's economic empowerment, women's role in security and stability, closing the gender gap, and now dreams, gender innovation, and results. We hope all of these events are contributing to elevate the women and girls agenda. I also want to give a warm welcome to all of you who are joining us online and to everyone here today from PEPFAR, USAID, MCC, The Hill, and across the development community. Clearly, this is an area of great interest. It's important to recognize the progress being made, to highlight these results, and to continue to rally everyone to continue to move this forward. We cannot forget our global commitment to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls by 2030. This calls for holding governments accountable, doing our part as the development implementers to turn this into reality, and to continue to engage, leverage, and deepen the capabilities of local governments, corporates, foundations, and every other type of actor we can to continue to deepen and expand all of these results that have been achieved so far thanks to PEPFAR and others. Evidence shows so far that girls' education is one of the most effective development investments. We know this. But we also know too many girls are still losing their chance for a better life. Too many are pulled out of school, pushed into early pregnancy or marriage, marginalized by gender-based violence or HIV/AIDS. Holistic, gender-based, and gender-focused programs like DREAMS recognize that all these issues are related, that one cannot solve them all at one time because they're all driven by deeply held social, cultural, and behavioral norms that undervalue women and girls. They are fundamentally driven by women and girls not having power, unable to decide whether to stay in school, who to marry, whether to get pregnant, and what careers or employment to pursue. So the programs you'll hear about today from PEPFAR, USAID, MCC, and Plan all put adolescent girls and young women at the center and try to give them more power over their own lives. So let's get started. I have now the great honor of introducing a powerful female leader to all of you, known to all of you. Ambassador Burks has had a long and distinguished career in public health as one of the leaders in the fight against HIV/AIDS globally. Her leadership at PEPFAR is well known, has allowed PEPFAR to reach more people than ever before, and create incredibly innovative programs like DREAMS. After the ambassador speaks, my planned colleague, Justin Fugel, will moderate our expert panel. Justin is our senior policy advisor. I'd like to thank him especially for all the work he's done in collaboration with the Bliss Center to pull this together. Ms. Ambassador, the stage is all yours.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, the most important thing is to get to the panel because they have all of the information we want to. Oops, okay, will my slides just miraculously come up? Okay. Great. Something's going to happen in that back room. Perfect. So thank you all for being here. And most importantly, really, I'm so deeply grateful over the last 3 years. Many of you have been incredibly unpaid supporters to us for Dreams, bringing us your best ideas, coming back, going into countries so that we can do mid-course corrections, having a really objective eye on what we were doing and how we could do it better. And everybody is contributing to this program with such an open spirit and a willingness for a dialogue. And I'm just really grateful for that because when we started Dreams and announced it, we knew there was a problem, but we had no idea really what to do. So we went through the literature and picked out every single scientific evidence program that had any data to suggest that you could change HIV incidence in young women. And then we put them all together. Our teams went out and worked with the on-the-ground teams so that they would select from that menu of activities that they would then conduct. And so this is very much what individual countries decided to do at each of the districts based on that menu. Now, we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot about the program, which was very much focused on young women 15 to 24-year-olds. We learned a lot that 20 to 24-year-olds don't have as much time as 15 to 19-year-olds. Now, we should have all known that. And so we have had to really retailer programs very much for 20 to 24-year-olds. There was a lot of data out there about the disproportional risk of young women to HIV/AIDS, and we conducted a whole series of surveys. We now have 7 done. These are big, large HIV/AIDS surveys done at the community level, looking at prevalence and incidence across different age bands and different geographies. And the first 3 surveys in Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Zambia documented the enormously higher risk of young women to HIV/AIDS. So what does that really look like when you're looking at prevalence by 5-year age bands? This is Swaziland. In that greenish, the lighter green bar, you can see jumps dramatically between 15 and 19 and 20 to 24, where young women's prevalence is already over 20%. And by the time they're 30 to 34, their prevalence is 50%. So really figuring out how we intercede in this unbelievable slope of greatly increasing prevalence. You can see young male prevalence is delayed by anything by 5 to 10 years based on now what we know from Koresha Karim, the life cycle of HIV/AIDS in sub-Saharan Africa. This is Malawi's data. I put the bar at 10% prevalence, so you again see this huge increase in prevalence. And in Malawi, the big jump is between 25 and 29. So every country is different. Therefore, all the programs had to be adapted specifically. And this is Zambia. Again, the line is at 10%, but you can see by 25, 15% of women are already HIV positive. And so the program was very much based on this data to create interventions for the 15 to 19 and the 20 to 24-year-olds to really change prevalence in those age groups. So this is what the surveys look like, and I know this is a little bit fuzzy. It's by who knows their status of people over 15. So it starts with the groups that are the most know their status at the country level. And again, these are community-based surveys done door to door. Swaziland, 85% of adults over 15 know their status. And of those, 87% are on treatment, and of those, 92% are virally suppressed. And you can see how that cascade goes all the way down to 60-some% know their status in Uganda. So it just shows you where we've made progress, where we need to make additional progress. The exciting thing is, whether you're a young woman, a young man, an older man, or an older woman, once you know your status, they're linking and staying on treatment. And that's independent of gender. Now, so we separated out the 15 to 24-year-olds and said, what's happening uniquely with them? And this is across all 7 of the communities which we have finished data in, the countries. And you can see the line now is at 50%. Now, last time we were talking about 80, everybody was over 50%. The lowest in the last slide was 66%. And you can see we fall way under 50% very early on in this profile. And so if you look in Uganda, less than 40%, and in Tanzania, less than 40% of the 15 to 24-year-olds know their status. And why is this? And this is where I always get to this issue. Everybody always tells me to integrate into the healthcare delivery system. There is no healthcare delivery system for non-pregnant 15 to 24-year-olds, or for young boys or young men 15 to 24-year-olds. They don't interact with the healthcare delivery system. There's not a proactive come to the healthcare delivery system when you don't have a broken arm. So they would not naturally come to the healthcare delivery system for services. So creating a healthcare system where young people interact in a proactive and positive way is really where we are going and have been going over the last year. But you can see the linkages to treatment and the viral suppression are lower in these age groups. And this really gets into the issue of, do our drugs have too many side effects for 15 to 24-year-olds, to the point, remember, they're going on treatment when they are not symptomatic, and then we're giving them potentially a medication that causes symptoms. And so they may be making choices to not continue with that medication. And those of you who follow PEPFAR land and our inability to be patient for anything, we've put a directive out there of how quickly we want countries to change to the new TLD regimen that has much less side effects and does not have efavirenz. And we've been very aggressive about this, but we've been aggressive about this because we can't identify people and then not give them a drug that we know is highly effective, less likely to induce resistance, but more importantly, has lower side effects. Piece I always talk about, this is Zambia, this is the youth bulge. So when the epidemic started in Zambia, there were 722,000 young women. There are now 1.6 million. So this is what we're dealing with, of a doubling of the young people without access or willingness to go to the healthcare delivery system. And so this is what DREAMS was born out of really creating that community will to really decrease the incidence of HIV for young women. So we announced it on World AIDS Day 2014, and World AIDS Day is in December, but they held their very first meeting of DREAM partners in, I think, January or February in South Africa. It was originally $300 million. It was a public-private partnership with Bill and Melinda Gates, Gilead, Girl Effect, Johnson & Johnson, ViiV Healthcare. We did an $85 million innovation challenges, which are in the field right now, that were very innovative and very much grassroots. And then last year and this year, we put almost $200 million into these countries once again to really support the countries in continuing this program. And so over 4 years, we will have put over $750 million, or $750 million, specifically solely focused on preventing infections in young girls. Solely prevention, solely structural. We've just added recently some PrEP elements to it. The other pieces, the circumcision, the diagnosis, the treatment, that's funded in a separate column. We wanted to put it all together because it's about a $2 billion program, but we didn't, because the young girls didn't want you ever talking about other people's programs when they finally were given voice. So we solely talk about the DREAMS money when we talk about DREAMS and what's happening. Some of you may have questions on how we had the results. I wanted to be very clear on how those results were generated. We had, over the last several years, baselines of age disaggregated prevalence data from all of our PMTCT sites that are in the districts in which this program was implemented. So we had a baseline, and then we had PMTCT data for under 24-year-old women. Again, it's only capturing pregnant women under 24, but it's giving us an insight into changes in HIV incidence. We also had these surveys in the field prioritized to the countries that were doing DREAMS with age band groups of each of these 5-year age bands to really understand changing prevalence in very young ages, which is consistent with incident changes. Recently, we have put out what we call incidence assays into the field, into the PMTCT clinics, to really be able to report on a quarterly basis incidence in young women. So what did we find? And I just want to, you're going to hear from the panel. They're the ones that made this happen. They're the ones you'll hear from Malawi, who on the ground created an environment where the incidence of young women dropped between 25 and 40%. So in the majority of our districts, almost 60+%, incidence dramatically declined in just 24 months of implementation. And so only 3 districts had an increase. We're looking into that, 3 out of the 63, very carefully to really understand what happened. And now we're looking in kind of a chi-squared, R-squared kind of analysis to try to line up what was done and what was the outcome. We have one problem, because what was started as, remember there was a menu that countries could select from, and some countries did all 8 to 10 things in each of the age band, and some of the countries only did 4. But we got the DREAMS groups together about 18 months ago, and they all heard each other's data, and so all of a sudden everybody's doing everything. So it's more difficult to do the chi-squared analysis, because when they saw the results from the other countries, they wanted to layer in the additional elements. But this is just from Swaziland, again, showing you how much the decline has been. The black is the recent survey. We had a survey baseline 5 years ago, which is the lighter turquoisey green, and you can see this dramatic decline in the front end prevalence, which was very encouraging to us. So you know the DREAMS countries, they are all the high burden countries. We've added DREAMS-like countries to the mix, and that added Namibia, Haiti, Rwanda, Cote d'Ivoire, I'm gonna forget one. Botswana, thank you. This is why I have a team. I have a newborn granddaughter who is now 7 weeks old. I have the 3 a.m. shift because I get up at 4 anyway, so they just said take the 3 a.m. shift to the 6, and it's very disorienting to me, but she's growing and thriving, and that's all that matters. But I have less of a peripheral brain than I used to, but I have people now that help me remember what I'm supposed to remember. But this is the layering piece. This is what I'm talking about. Some countries were layering 3 to 4 things. Now they're layering often the entire 8-piece package. The team has created these amazing story maps that are on our website, so you can click on and really see the reality of these numbers where it matters. The young girls that we're reaching and changing they are changing their story themselves. And I think for the first time, when I get to do focus groups with the young women, they tell me for the first time someone is not only listening, but hearing. And I think that's a different thing, and I think they feel like finally they're being heard. So key priorities to the program are staying in school, preventing early pregnancy, preventing child marriage, preventing sexual violence, and post-violence care. And you can't see this, that's really tragic. In the middle, the red block, are the girls, adolescents, who are together then surrounded by components of the program that works with families and communities, recognizing that the young girl is in this situation in which she has to thrive, and we have to work on all aspects of it. This is the number of girls that we've reached just in each of the age groups, and you can see now it's in the millions. We're very excited about that, but we want reach to result in a better outcome, and I think that's the data we're getting now of the declining incidence. We're excited about the DREAMS-like countries and the COP18 focus. Oops, I did that myself. And I could fix it, it's shocking, is really working on either geographically expanding, and more importantly, we believe, is getting to the 9 to 14-year-olds, because we're hearing from the 15-year-olds about how their life changed in the 9 to 14-year-old age segment, often with frank rape within their culture. And so really figuring out how do we move from post-rape care to preventing rape in all of these countries, and it's been really a focus of the team. Our COP and our COP guidance is online, so if you go to pepfar.gov, you can click and see all of the DREAMS programming, the DREAMS priorities, and our real focus in 9 to 14-year-olds is of getting them to a place where they're avoiding risk, avoiding sexual risk, avoiding risk of becoming HIV positive, and avoiding the risk of sexual violence, and really focusing on what does that mean. And I know we're taking on a difficult place, but we cannot keep talking about post-rape care and post-violence without dealing with the front end and without dealing with some justice for these children in general who are experiencing these issues in the community. So why is this important? I want to be very clear. We've had these violence against children surveys that have been out in the field since 2009, done in a whole series of countries. And we've known how many girls and boys have early sexual debut. And we know, and you can't really see the numbers here, but with Malawi, it's about 30%. 30% of the young girls' first sexual experience was rape. And so really figuring out how are we going to, we can't change their future if we don't ensure that that past doesn't exist for other young women. And I think when you're dealing with an issue where the mother may have been raped, the grandmother may have been raped, the auntie may have been raped, it's become so normative in many of these cultures that we have to work together with the government and the communities to really create a new pathway for young women, recognizing that what's happening to them between 9 and 14 may be setting them on a trajectory of falling out of school, falling pregnant, often being put into a child marriage, and that whole spiral. And I think you're going to hear some stories about that. In addition, it collects data about not just sexual violence, but physical violence and emotional violence in the household. And you can see that the risk for early sexual debut dramatically increases the more violent type episodes and the more categories of violence these children are experiencing. And so really taking, once again, this kind of comprehensive structural approach to address all of these drivers simultaneously. We have taken that kind of aggressive approach because we feel like we don't have enough data right now to cherry pick the best while we work forward to finding the best. And I think we're committed to finding that combination of interventions that are optimized, but it's going to take us probably another year or two of working in the communities and getting the data. I'm so glad that Gretchen is here because part of the success of Dreams and Dreams Like in our program is working with our orphans and vulnerable children providers who have been our platform in the community for the last 15 years, often include faith-based organizations very much dedicated to the community and to the children in that community. She's been working with them very hard to get them to move from care for under fives to really the child and what the child faces all the way up to 15. And I think our OVC providers are going to be the core to preventing this violence of 9 to 14-year-olds. So thank you. I really look forward to the panel because they had the on-the-ground evidence base. That's the most important piece. And then I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Well, thanks again to Ambassador Burks for, as always, a very compelling presentation. She will be coming back at the end during Q&A, so don't miss that. So I'm Justin Fugel. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor at PLAN, and I'd like to introduce the panel. We have Gloria Mkandawire from Malawi, who is the Chief of Party for the One Community Program. Johns Hopkins CCP and PLAN and Project Hope all work on this together in Malawi. Next we have Nadia Hilmi, who is going to represent the voice of young women on the panel. And just let us say that whenever we have a panel about young women, let us please have some young women on the panel. Right? There are remarkably a remarkable number of panels you see about young women in which there are no young women. So we definitely want to avoid that. Nadia is a member of the Plan USA Youth Advisory Board and a member of the Plan's Global Youth Advisory Board. And both of these boards actually do inform our executives. And finally, we have Michelle Adado from the MCC. She's the Senior Operations Advisor for Gender and Social Inclusion. And as you can see from her bio, Michelle has a great deal of experience and expertise in this area. So, Gloria, let me start with you. Really, we want to talk very much about one community. And we know that Malawi is one of the poorest countries in the world. There's a very high rate of extreme poverty there. This causes a great deal of vulnerability to early marriage, to early pregnancy. And you even told me about a rather high incidence of what you call transactional and survival sex. So, I mean, that's just speaking to a very high degree of vulnerability that they have. And so DREAMS, as we've just heard, recognize that all of these problems would have to be dealt with together, that the vulnerabilities are all linked, that they have to do with the inability of young women to make key decisions in their lives. And so it really wanted to have somewhere where the girls could come together to find support amongst themselves, right? And so one of the great aspects of the One Community program are the Go Girls clubs. And so far, more than 27,000 girls have gone through the Go Girls clubs in One Community. So you can see it generates a lot of interest among them. So can you tell us about how is it that the Go Girls clubs are so interesting to the young women there?
Thank you so much, Justin, for your question. That's a very important question. It's very important for girls when they come together that they are motivated and that they meet and discuss their issues. There are a number of things that help us to make sure that the girls stay motivated and they join the Go Girls clubs. First of all, when we are entering the community, we make sure we enter the community through the traditional leaders. So when we meet with the traditional leaders, we explain to them what DREAMS is all about, why it's important that we reach out to girls, to adolescent girls and young women who are out of school. We focus on adolescent girls and young women who are out of school. So when they understand the situation, the traditional leaders, they help us to bring us together, these girls. And just because we've gone through the traditional leaders, the girls feel motivated, they accept the program. And as a result, they want to participate in the program because it's respected by the traditional leaders. We also, once we have identified the girls and put them in the clubs, we engage the girls to make sure they identify peer facilitators who are going to facilitate sessions as they engage in the Go Girls clubs. So these peer facilitators, we help them to identify who can actually read and write because they need to go through training. We also help them to make sure they identify someone they trust. So within the club, once they come together, 25 girls, they identify who is their peer facilitator. And just because their peer facilitators are identified by the girls themselves, they respect them, and when they go through the sessions, they feel motivated that we need to go back and make sure we hear more. And the facilitators too, they undergo through a training. They learn about how to use participatory methodologies, how to run the sessions. As a result, girls feel motivated. The other thing that motivated the girls to come for the sessions is when they start hearing about the success stories of their colleagues. So once those success stories are coming out, they hear their friend to say, you know, because I went through this session, then it motivated me to go back to school. When I went through my DREAMS session, it motivated me to make sure that I go and get tested. They hear these success stories. As a result, the girls feel motivated and they continue to participate in these sessions. The other thing is that as we implement the activities within the clubs, which creates a safe space for them, We also make sure we link with several partners so that other services, other activities are layered so they get the services. So if there are girls who want to access family planning, we have Dreams implementing partners who bring these services so that the girls are able to access. As a result, the girls feel motivated that I had a need to make sure that I access family planning. Here, the services are coming to me. And also linking them to other interventions or other activities that meet their needs. When they see that their needs are being met, it keeps them motivated to stay in these Go Girls clubs. So these are some of the things that help us, that help the girls stay motivated in the Go Girls clubs.
Thank you. And you can, one of the other innovations of One Community and Dreams more generally, excuse me, is the idea of targeting, right? Of the idea that if you think of 10 to 14-year-old girls or 15 to 19-year-old girls or 20 to 24-year-old young women, clearly you're talking about different stages in life, different needs that they have, different things that they're interested in, different issues that they're facing. And so the program has that kind of disaggregation. You have 10 to 14-year-olds, 15 to 19-year-olds who are married, 15 to 19-year-olds who are unmarried, and then similarly for the 20 to 24-year-olds. And you could see how that would really make the program more responsive to the challenges, and also, you know, create more camaraderie among the young women. So tell us about that, about how One Community is tailored, both in messages and in services to the different groups.
Thank you very much. Audience segmentation is very important. Even within this program, we see that different groups, like the 10 to 14 or the 9 to 14-year-olds, have got different needs. And then the 15 to 19 have different needs. Those that are married and unmarried, they have different needs. So segmentation is very important. And what helps us to make sure that we tailor the needs, the messages to the needs, is this segmentation. For example, the 10 to 14-year-old, we mainly focus on risk avoidance. We make sure that, because we work with girls out of school, they understand the importance of going back to school. We also make sure that, because they are young, we also make sure that they are linked to case management. We also make sure that we also reach out to their caregivers. So their caregivers are also going through sessions to make sure that they support the young girls. They understand the importance of the girls to go back to school. They understand the importance of making sure that they are not abused, they are kept safe. So the parents also go through sessions. It's because we have segmented them. We know that the 10 to 14-year-olds, these are their needs. For us to be able to address their needs, we also needed to target their parents. When we talk about the 15 to 19 or maybe the 20 to 24 who are married, most of these girls come to these Go Girls clubs with their children. So we know that some are married, some are not married. So we tailor the sessions or the messages to make sure that, apart from reaching out to the girls themselves, they prevent HIV, they access family planning, maybe some of them want to go back to school, some of them maybe need a financial literacy, but we also make sure we tailor messages that will help them as young girls to take care of their children. So you find that in those sessions, we include parenting sessions so that the girls are able to know how to take care of their children, to protect them from violence, to make sure that their children also go to school to sort of cut the cycle. You know, they dropped out of school probably because of early marriage and pregnancy, but you know, they can cut the cycle for their children. So it helps us to tailor the messages so that it reaches the needs of those girls.
Right, thank you. I can see how that would be more effective. Nadia, let me turn to you now. You were, you're representing yourself here, but also the youth in Kenya who work on, are part of a PLAN's program in Kenya called Nalindi, which works on a number of these issues. And I know you had a conversation with a number of them. So tell us about some of the challenges they're facing and some of the pathways they found to meet some of those challenges in Kenya.
Yeah, so last Wednesday I had a consultation with about 10 girls from the Nairobi area who were participating in the program, and they were between the ages of 18 and 25. And they sort of came from a range of backgrounds. Some of them are mothers, some had finished secondary school, and a lot of them, or all of them, were involved in some sort of vocational training, so housekeeping or hairdressing, hospitality, and just in a lot of these programs to build their leadership skills. And it was great to sort of talk to them as, a young person, talking to them and listening to their experiences. And in terms of the challenges they faced, they talked a lot about, one thing that came up a lot was the prevalence of drugs, and specifically heroin, marijuana, and alcohol. And they said that was very easy to access. They also talked about early pregnancy. Obviously, they said as early as 12 or even sometimes 9, as soon as a girl sort of shows any sort of signs of becoming a woman or looking like a woman. Even if she's 9 years old, the parents could, marry her off to a richer man for a dowry, or even a lack of funds for education was one. And a big thing that a lot of them mentioned was a lack of information to sort of make informed decisions, and that sort of led to a whole range of things, including peer pressure, not just among boys and men, but also like among their peers to sort of either go into drugs or into relationships. And another big thing was the lack of opportunities, positive opportunities to sort of do something with their free time that they would enjoy. So obviously if they don't have, you have free time and everyone else is doing drugs and alcohol, that's what you're going to lead into, or go into sort of unsafe relationships. And so that was a big thing. And another thing they talked about was the social expectations for young girls within the house even. A lot of them, one girl said that as soon as a young girl shows a sign of being a little bit strong, then they'll have to help their mother with housework, or they'll also be a victim of domestic abuse and domestic violence and things like that. So those were some of the challenges they talked about. In terms of overcoming it, they talked a lot about using, like you said, using their voice and their rights and their sort of dignity to overcome that, and having a positive mindset. And a lot of ways, one way that was very sort of obvious was the importance of community support groups and the mentors, the community health volunteers, and the other young girls that they always went to. They talked about how they had a focus groups and support groups that had been meeting for the past 4 months, once a week, and so they went to that, and that was really helpful, which sort of covered a range of topics from entrepreneurship to skills building. There was actually one girl who she said, I think her name was Magdalene, she said as soon as she graduated school, she knew she couldn't say no. She had to sort of, keep going, even though her situation wasn't ideal. But so she, after school, she started sort of cleaning and doing other people's laundry, and she went into the program and chose to study hospitality and trained at a hotel. And then now today, after getting all these leadership skills and getting a grant from a partner, getting some legal services and marketing help, she started her own business, and she has a washing machine, and she has takes on some employees from when she needs it to help her out. So that was sort of one success story, and a lot of the girls are talking about how I use these stories of my peers to see how she was in the same situation as me, but now she's through this program, through continuing with the leadership training and through Dreams, through Linde, she's been able to sort of rise up from her situation, just having that positive mindset, and that was a big thing as well.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, it's we like to have folks actually come from Kenya, but these days it's difficult to get visas, as you can imagine. So one of the other things we wanted to talk about with this is how you reach the youth, right? Because my daughter has told me, look, only grown-ups and corporations use hashtags anymore, right? You're tweeting, but we don't read those. We're all on Instagram or whatever. So you're not, if you're tweeting at us, we're not reading those, right? And I think that in Kenya, I'm sure the youth are very social media savvy as well. And so Actually, Ambassador Burks has talked one time about how it would be interesting to have messages, peer-to-peer messages, where you talk to a young girl talks to another one about, look, I'm on the HIV treatment, but it messes up my hair, it messes up my skin, it messes up my social life, right? So it's not like that's the kind of message that might help to hit home and make this seem more relevant, right? So what kinds of things would you say as yourself, and did they talk about how you reach them?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of, I guess, I totally agree with what you said about, social media, all these hashtags, young people, not just in Kenya, but even, my peers, social media isn't necessarily used to, get information that way. We're not getting, I think we use it more for interacting with each other, and all these hashtags about dreams or whatever, they're great, but they're more just sort of corporations and professionals interacting with each other, so you're not really, reaching the young people. And that's the same in the U.S. I think that's the same everywhere. So that's not as effective as a method as I think one thing that the girls talked a lot about was the importance of the community and learning from each other, learning, like I said, like hearing success stories and things like that. And word of mouth was definitely a huge way that they learned about different programs and the successes. And I think they said that they do have phones, but not all of them have a smartphone. So obviously social media, if they don't have access to internet, that's not going to be a huge method to get them get the message across. There were some in the consultation. There were staff, and they mentioned how they had TV shows and radio programs and how that was effective at spreading the message. But the youth didn't really talk about that as much. They talked more about they get information from their peers, and they meet in these support groups, every few weeks, and that's how they learn about the programs. Or when they're hanging out outside of school or whatever, then they talk about these things, and that's how they get their information. And in terms of, I guess, tips of ways we ask, the ways that they get their information and what they think would be most effective, a lot of them talked about having flyers or having magazines where you can hand them out and where you can read success stories of people in their community, people who are just like them, people they know about, and talking about the program and how it's changed their lives. One girl also mentioned road shows, and she said, oh yeah, that's a great, really fun way to get youth involved. It's a sort of like huge event. It will bring the whole community together. And they talked a lot about one idea could be, using youth ambassadors as sort of representatives of the program to go and talk to other people in the community about why the program is so great, how it's helped them, and setting up youth advisory boards like Plan has done sort of all over the world, which has been a great way to, talk to the youth instead of just trying to give them this program, but actually sort of understanding how it affects them, why they think it's important, getting their experiences. And youth advisory boards are definitely a great way to sort of both for the youth to sort of give them leadership skills and training and build their confidence, but also for the programs that are being run to make them more effective and cater to young people. So,
Thank you. So Michelle, I wanted to turn to you now, and I asked to have you on the panel to bring in the MCC's perspective, because the MCC has an approach that we all know is about constraints to growth, right? Constraints to economic growth. And so that leads the MCC to work on things like ports and roads, but also to work on gender programming. And so it's a very important outcome. And in many ways that, as in the case of PEPFAR with Dreams, the evidence of the benefits of working with women and girls led the MCC to also work with women and girls. And so, what did the MCC find in your economic analysis that led you to that conclusion?
Sure. Well, first of all, I would like to say thank you to Plan and the Wilson Center for organizing an event on this very important topic, and to inviting MCC to be part of this conversation, as well as congratulations to PEPFAR and Gloria and Nadia and all of your implementing partners for the kinds of results that you're finding. The sort of evidence we're hearing today is of a lot of interest to MCC, so I'll definitely be bringing this back. So as you say, MCC works specifically on economic growth. Our mandate is reducing poverty through economic growth. So whenever we make any decisions about what kinds of projects we're going to invest in, we have to look at the evidence base and what it says about what is constraining economic growth, and then and then select our projects around that. And when we talk about economic growth, we're not talking about sort of GDP in the abstract, we're talking about incomes for families and for people. That's how we measure it. So when we make that assessment of what is constraining growth, sometimes we find that the evidence leads us to invest in water or electricity because lack of access to it has implications for health or for economic productivity. Sometimes it leads us to invest in the quality of roads because of the implications for getting goods to market. And sometimes it leads us to invest in education and health. So bringing it back around now to the question of gender, there is a growing evidence base that has been building for roughly about the last 3 decades, linking gender equality or gender inequalities to growth outcomes. Some of that has to do with increasing access to women's and girls' increasing the access of women and girls to assets, to productive assets, including education and health, or to labor market opportunities. And then there's all sorts of analysis done, big global data sets on the implications of increasing equality, gender equality, for overall annual GDP growth. So there's sort of new studies coming out, like the McKinsey study that was showing that if we could achieve complete global parity between men and women, it could add up to 25 trillion to global GDP by 2025. So there's strong evidence coming out. So MCC's gender policy is linked specifically to that evidence base between the relationship between investing in gender and the overall economic growth outcomes. So we have a gender policy that recognizes that gender inequalities reduce economic growth and then requires us to systematically integrate gender into every aspect of our assessments, our project design, our implementation oversight, and then our M&E. So then coming back around to the question of adolescent girls, it brings us to, and young women, brings us back to the space of education and health. There's a lot of evidence linking that. Of course, some of the strongest evidence links educational outcomes to economic growth as well as in income growth. OECD data from 30 countries found that increase in educational attainment accounted for 50% of economic growth, over half of which was due to increased female educational attainment. So the evidence there is very strong. Of course, there's also much evidence on the impacts of health, not the least of which is HIV and AIDS, to growth and economic productivity. So the evidence is there. So, but we also know, and this is something that MCC has been increasingly concerned with, we know that strengthening girls' education alone is often not enough to lead that pathway to getting jobs and sustainable incomes. So we find that even where girls succeed in school, you often find high levels of youth unemployment, very low levels of women's labor market participation. So in Morocco, for example, a very striking statistic, net secondary school enrollment nationally is 79% for women, for girls, compared to 82% for boys. That's very close. But then when you look at female labor force participation, it's 25% nationally. It's one of the lowest in the world compared to 73% for men. So you see that, that disconnect there. So MCC has increasingly focused not just on increasing girls' chances for success in school, which continues to be very important in our work, but also for making that transition to the labor market. So that means working at 4 levels. It means working with communities and households, in the schools, with employers, as well as with governments to work on policies. So I'll just give you an example from our compact in Morocco, which is just sort of gearing up and getting into full swing. We found in our analysis of the evidence that the risk of dropping out of secondary school was very high for both boys and girls, particularly in the rural areas, but that the reasons, of course, are different for boys and girls. And so addressing the issue of girls in particular, we invest in girl-friendly infrastructure, which often means things like separate bathrooms for boys and girls. We are working with rural communities to bring families and community leaders and the girls themselves into identifying what are the constraints, what factors are leading to dropouts, and what some of the solutions could be. We're training teachers and school administrators about how to be sensitive to the different kinds of needs of boys and girls and ensure a safe, inclusive learning environment. We are also using some innovative approaches like bonus systems that go to schools for achieving certain gendered outcomes. We also found in our assessment of the evidence, looking at the whole area of technical and vocational education and training, that only about 32% of the participants were women, and that they tended to be segregated into a narrower, lower paying range of professions, and that women were comprising, for example, only 23% of those involved in some of the more sort of science STEM areas like mechanics and electrical and so on. So the project is actually working with the Department of Technical and Vocational Training, as well as with private sector organizations, to look at how do we get girls into, just to consider a wider range of professions that could potentially be higher paying, looking at incentives to giving incentives to companies to engage in these kinds of activities that could bring more girls in, science camps, mentoring programs, career fairs, and intensive training programs. And then also looking at potentially a TVET facility where organizations or companies apply for funds, but there are actual selection criteria linked to gendered outcomes and then incentives for actually achieving those outcomes. So then just the very last piece of this is, of course, working within the labor market itself to try to achieve higher employment rates for women that are more sustainable. So we have a results-based financing activity to actually working with private sector employers to give more placements to young women, and then working with the Ministry of Labor around we're actually encouraging the private sector to have a stronger approaches for addressing some of the discriminatory factors that young women and women in general meet once they're actually in the workplace. And then there's a whole other area of activities around our industrial zones to support potentially business incubators for women. So those are some of the examples about how we actually link practically gender inequality and how we work with young women to achieve our economic growth outcomes. And then I just want to make sort of one related point, which is just the critical importance of data to our work, to this work. That in order to the more data we have, and the more usable that data is to more people, the easier it is for us to be able to make that case to invest that money, because investing that money leads to outcomes, the kinds of outcomes we want to see.
Right. And it's interesting because that's what Nadia was talking about too, that, one of the young women was trying to start her own business, right? And there's that gap where there is a whole chain, right? And I think that's what Dreams also recognizes, that there's a chain of vulnerabilities, and you overcome one, which leads to the next one, and there's a new vulnerability, and you have to work on health and education and connect all of those dots together, so that you have a young woman who's graduated from school. She hasn't gotten married too young or pregnant too young. She's finished, and now she might want to start a business. But again, where does she find the capital for that? Who will help her? What's her social network, right? How does she make that transition into the workforce? So that's what I think is genius about these programs, the way they connect all those dots together. Yeah. And there was a program that Plan and MCC worked on in Burkina Faso called Bright, which was a very successful program. And one of the reasons, again, was that we talked with the young women, or the girls in that case, really. I mean, this is a primary school program. And they told us things like, well, one of the reasons I can't go to school is because I have to carry water, right? I spend too much time carrying water. That's why I don't go to school. Or I'm not in school because I'm taking care of my siblings, right? And so, or I don't go to school because I don't have any sanitary pads. And so, once a month, then I don't go that week, right? And there are no facilities, and there's no privacy, and so on, right? And so all of those things were connected, and you think, well, this is a girls' education program. Isn't it about building schools? But it really wasn't. If you just built the schools, all those other obstacles were keeping her out of school anyway. So tell us a little bit about that program.
Sure, sure. Well, Burkina Faso had one of the lowest primary school enrollment rates in the world, and that's one of the reasons we ended up working there and choosing to work in the education space. There were many reasons for it, and as you said, an important diagnostic process involving girls in helping us analyze what those reasons were and developing the solutions was a really important part of its success. It was implemented in 132 rural villages in Burkina Faso, in 10 provinces that had some of the lowest enrollment rates in the country. And then that was the first BRIGHT program, and then the second BRIGHT program built an additional 400 classrooms as well as about 400 facilities for the teachers to live in. It also involved constructing primary schools with certain kinds of amenities that were not typical for primary schools in the area. For example, 3 classrooms, as well as the question of bathrooms separately for boys and girls. That was an important part of it. But as you say, it addressed in a holistic fashion the multiple kinds of challenges that girls were facing. As you pointed out, water is something that takes up a lot of girls' time. And so it was building the schools near water points or actually drilling boreholes and putting in water pumps at the school so the girls could take the clean water home with them. The whole issue of daycare as well. So the program built daycare centers at the schools and then also did training for the monitors, for the caretakers at the schools. There were a number of other aspects. There was mentoring and tutoring for girls. Some had school gardens. There were different implementers, and they chose different types of interventions, complementary interventions, based on the kinds of the ideas that were suggested by the local participants and the girls themselves. But a lot of them was a lot of it was a question of kind of tracing along the chain what are all the different causal factors and the causal factors of the causal factors. And so some of the districts chose to actually have livelihood opportunities for the mentors of the girls so that they could be more focused on their jobs and less sort of distracted by all the other challenges of their own lives. There was also gender sensitivity training for teachers and for school administrators. So that was the supply side on the sort of facilities themselves and how to make them more attractive and more successful. And then there was also the whole demand side. So there was activities that targeted girls, such as take-home rations for girls that were conditional on a 90% attendance rate in school, as well as a campaign in the communities for parents to help them understand the value of girls' education. There was NGOs that were conducting girls' education days, and then an adult literacy program for parents themselves. And so just turning to the results for a minute, there was an evaluation that was done in 2016, very rigorous evaluation done by Mathematica, that found that BRIGHT increased school enrollment and primary school completion rates for both boys and girls, but the results were stronger for girls. Young women between the ages of 13 and 22 saw primary school completion rates increased by over 13%, which is quite high for education interventions, and enrollment increased by 10 percentage points. We also saw results for marriage rates for young women that decreased by over 6%. So again, these were all pretty high numbers to see for these kinds of interventions. Also positive impacts on test scores for both boys and girls, but closing that gender gap in test scores. But there is, I think, just one other piece of this to think about, again, kind of looking at it from a holistic perspective and this idea of looking at all these different levels of the problems. There's some more recent evidence that some of these complementary interventions, so the schools are still there, but some of these more complementary interventions that led to the success are not necessarily being sustained by the government as the years go on. And so it points to the importance of a lot of focus on working with policies, governments with policies and institutions to create more ownership and more incentives for them at that institutional level and the policy level to continue this kind of work. So the work that we're doing in Morocco now, as well as Cote d'Ivoire, is looking very much at what those sustainability issues are and how we can do that through work on policies and institutions. So in Morocco, we're working with these decentralized regional academies to create their own ownership of the process and build a model that's more scalable and replicable. That's really sort of the main objective in this case. And then we have similar kinds of institutional policy work going on now in Cote d'Ivoire and El Salvador, in both of those countries, working with actually creating a gender unit within the Ministry of Education to build an internal governmental sort of advocacy institution for continuing this kind of work. Again, another very important point of this is what you brought up was getting girls themselves at the table. So I think that's increasingly something that we want to continue to do on our work, as well as recognizing the importance of data to be able to enable us to continue to do this kind of work. So I just want to mention, sort of related to this question of putting girls at the table and using data, an important piece of work collaboration we've had with PEPFAR over the last few years on the Data Collaboratives Learning Initiative, which helps to improve the capacity of individuals and communities and organizations and governments to use data themselves to identify problems and come up with innovative solutions. And so we've been learning from PEPFAR and their partners about how young women themselves can come up with ideas that weren't necessarily thought of by others in this space. So just giving an example, in Tanzania, from that collaboration of, there's a young woman named Rose Funja who came up with the idea of using data from Tanzania government portals and from PEPFAR portals to create a diagnostic tool to predict where girls are likely to drop out of school and then to be ready with the solutions in those areas. That's sort of a number of different pieces of that kind of holistic approach.
Yeah, thank you. So, Gloria, I want to come back to you now. I think that in many ways, one of the best ways to understand these kinds of programs is to talk about one person, right? One young woman who has participated in one community. And so I really wanted to invite you to tell us a story.
Okay, thank you very much. So in Malawi, with the Go Girls Clubs, the girls who participate in Go Girls Clubs benefit quite a lot. There are many stories of young women who are able now to stand out and talk about their issues and be confident enough about their issues. So I'll just share with you one story. That's Melissa, Sherifa, and her husband, Lastin. So Sherifa is 23 years old. She got pregnant when she was 16 years old, and she was in a second year of her secondary school education at that point in time, and then she dropped out of school. She moved out of her parents' home. She went and started living with her grandmother, and she still lives with her grandmother. After 2 years later, she got married to the boyfriend, and they started living together. And she got pregnant again, so she had a second child. While she was married with Lastin, she experienced a lot of abuse. Lastin was never home. Whatever little finances they had, Lastin would not bring the finances home, and so she was very miserable. Then last year, she heard a community announcement by the traditional leaders where the traditional leader was inviting all girls out of school. And when she attended the meeting, she found that they were talking about girls joining Go Girls clubs. So she was curious, and she decided to join Go Girls club. And in the club, she went through various sessions, and she saw that she was gaining confidence. And while she was hearing stories from her friends, and also the discussion, she decided to she gathered the courage, and when she went home, she started talking to her husband, and she started sharing what she was learning from the clubs to her husband. She shared about HIV prevention. She shared about her dream that she wants to be in life. She also shared about HIV services like testing. So the husband started listening, and eventually she was able to convince her husband to go and get tested together. So that was one of her achievement, to be able to have confidence and face the husband and say, you know what, it's important that we need to go and get tested together. So they went and got tested together, and now they know their status, which was an achievement for her. But in addition to that, she continued sharing information she was learning from the Go Girls Club, and the husband started listening. And now the husband stopped staying away from home or spending nights out of the house. He started now listening to her wife, and then started also encouraging the wife to continue going to attend Go Girls Clubs. So one of her vision, Refina, was that she wanted to have a business, but she didn't know how. So where we implement these activities, we also have other implementing partners. So Save the Children, through the Innovation Challenge Fund, they are training girls in vocational skills in various areas. So she was linked to that training, and currently she's attending that training. She's very enthusiastic. She's very happy because now she sees the future. And so she shares still that information with her husband, and the husband encourages her to continue with the training. She says that at the end of the training, they will eventually get a startup a package where they're going to start the business. So around the Go Girls Clubs, she also wants to join village savings and loans. She was telling me that, you know, she recently our teams went out there and started talking about village savings and loans, and she's just looking forward to when a group is going to be formed so that she's part of village savings and loans. And one of our vision is also, our dream is to go back to school. She was telling me that in the next season of school, she's going to go back so that she finishes her secondary school. She says that that is very important for her. Her grandmother encourages her. She's very happy about now the couple. They are making decisions together. They are planning having their dreams as a couple. So this is a story of one young woman, but there are many stories out there. And we really appreciate the funding that we are getting from PEPFAR through USAID Malawi, because it's touching many lives. It's making a difference in many young adolescent girls and young women. I also want to thank various implementing partners and dreams. We collaborate very well. We are able to link girls to access various services. For example, Sherifa managed to access to enroll into a vocational skills training. Some of them get scholarships through innovation, Dreams Innovation Challenge programs. So I really want to thank my colleagues for this collaborative role that we are having. The program is really touching many lives. This is one of the stories I wanted to share with you. The pictures you are seeing, it's Sherifina and her husband and her son. One of her son was on school at this time, I think. Yeah. So that's the story from Malawi, and there are many stories we can share.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Okay, so we will turn to Q&A now with the audience. I'd like to invite Ambassador Burks to join us once again. And we'll take a few questions at a time. And if you would, please ask a question. And please identify yourself and your organization. So we have microphones Well, I see, of course, there's a woman right here in the front. There's a gentleman also there in the middle, and all the way in the back. We'll take those three to start.
Should I stand up or keep
Yes,
sitting
that's
down?
helpful if you would stand.
Okay.
Thank you.
My name is Taroub Faramand. I'm the president of WhyHer, a women-owned small company catering to gender integration. Thank you so much for the presentation, and thank you for the funding and for the project. I'm extremely excited about Dreams, and I hope the program continues because it really touched many girls and young women's lives. I just want to say one quick comment and one question. My comment is regarding using the data. Michelle, you mentioned how we use the data, and we, in fact, train those girls to be able to collect data, analyze data, and be able to design programs themselves to close gaps. And we use the science of improvement to do that. One of the things that we identified, or the girls identified, is the need for them to have sexual training on sexual health. This issue was not discussed here, but I wanted to bring it to everyone's attention because the issue of sexual satisfaction and the issue of impotence is important to address. Those girls wanted to go out and experiment, and they had multiple sexual partners. That was one of the reasons that we identified as a gap in the program. The other thing that we identified is the importance of connecting those girls with income generation. I know it's part of the program, but we observed a disconnect between partners that lead income generation activities and partners who lead other services. And my question is, how will this program continue? This is extremely important. I know it's ending or ended, and it is so important that we continue. I hear from those girls that you changed our lives, but we want this to continue. And those girls are really, they have power. Our role was to enable them to exercise their power. So thank you so much, and congratulations on your granddaughter, Ambassador.
Okay, and there is a gentleman here in the middle. If you could put your hand up again so they can see you.
Do you mind?
Great, thank you. My name is Alex. I work with Michelle at MCC. Hello. And our colleague at WhyHer asked almost exactly the question I was going to ask, which is what would access to reproductive health, and namely contraception and abortion, how would that fit into a holistic approach to helping girls? In one of the countries that I work on, Niger, they have the highest rate of fertility and the highest child marriage rate in the world. And often you see parents who say, our daughter is 15, she's starting to hang around with boys, so rather than have her get pregnant out of marriage, we're going to get her married right now. And so you have to wonder what kind of intervention, access to contraception and abortion, what that could do to prevent that. And that's all.
Great, thank you. And then there was a person all the way in the back by the wall. And so we'll take those three and that'll be the first round.
It's okay. Thank you, Jill Morrison with Georgetown University Law Center. I was wondering if there was any resistance among traditional leaders when the program discussed ending early marriage, and if so, how they were brought on board with that particular part of the platform.
Okay, so a question about training in sexual health, a question around abortion, reproductive health, family planning linked with child marriage, and about is there resistance from traditional leaders? So please go ahead.
Great. So I'll be very brief. First, I probably wasn't clear on the first slide. It was a 2-year central program that we then made a permanent country operational plan program, and we increased the budget to about $200 million a year. So the program is going to continue in these 15 countries. We're really evaluating where else it should be and how it should be addressed. And the countries decide whether they want to layer on more services or expand geographically. It's all their decisions. All of the programs, and that's why I brought up the community, the family, and the child, because we see the child embedded in this complex situation. And I think we've worked very hard in Malawi and all of these countries. Every single country has sexual education as part of their school curriculum. I would say it is never taught. The teachers are very uncomfortable with teaching it. It is taught, I can tell you, in certain places where there's Peace Corps volunteers. So our Peace Corps volunteers have been extraordinary. It doesn't matter if they're teaching English or they're teaching science. They bring in those questions and answer them for the young women and the young boys, and I think that's really extraordinary. But it's been paired with a CDC program that was Parents Matter here, that's been Family Matters there in Africa, and really creating families' ability to talk about these issues in general, recognizing that information is coming from all of those different directions. In all of the countries we work in currently, except for Mozambique and South Africa, abortion is illegal except for in the consequences of rape or other issues related to incest. So we work within the structures of the countries and the communities. Traditional leaders, thank you for bringing that up, and I think that was opening by our great colleague from Malawi. It is really the traditional leaders. There was a chief in Malawi who was just going from, she was annulling all the marriages for the children that were under 18. She was just going in and saying, nope, done, back in school. And the community was thrilled. I mean, it was really, I think it was so empowering because now all the male chiefs are like, oh, is that all I had to do? So again, showing these innovations that are happening at the country level, I think our job, and if I could just have, if you could indulge me for 1 second, have the Dreams team stand that's here. So you can see they are a very, Anjali, please, also tiny, tiny group. That's all of them. That's all of them. But it's that tiny group that is really a force multiplier because of the countries. And that tiny group's job is to take all these incredible insights that are coming out of Malawi and Zambia and these solutions and the fact that a female chief is annulling marriages and getting that information across the platform and really figuring out how to get that message across the platform. And that's been really important to us. So thank you. The program is not ending. If anything, we hope it's becoming more stronger and stronger. Just one quick comment, because we talked about education and unemployment. I showed you those numbers of a doubling or more than doubling of the 15 to 24-year-olds. This all has to do with improving under 5 survival, which many of in this room contributed to. But the governments and the general did not plan either the primary schools, the secondary schools, or the vocational opportunities for these youth. And so we are behind in every single country because there are so many more than people thought they were going to have. And it's it's wonderful, and then people talk about the this demographic dividend, but it will only be a dividend if all of these issues that each of you brought up are answered, relevant to primary schools, secondary school, no child marriage, no early pregnancies, and really addressing vocational training. And I think that really shows you how much work needs to be done.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to chime in on the questions?
Just to add briefly to that point, which is that, so we've talked about how education and health leads to labor market participation, but it of course works the other way around, just emphasizing the importance of those economic opportunities, that if you have the economic opportunities, it works at so many levels. First of all, it creates hope, and we know that hope is an important part of contributes to adolescent choices and behavior. And then also parents see what other value the girls can have to their families if they're not married. And that makes a difference as well at that, at that important age. So sort of seeing how these things both, work together.
I just want to add on the traditional leaders. What we're observing in Malawi is that once you bring traditional leaders together, you train them on what are the issues surrounding girls and what is their role to make sure that those girls are protected. We are seeing that traditional leaders are coming up and actually providing that safe space for the girls to be able to participate in activities. They are able to bring community members together and talk about the issues that girls face and what they can do in terms of preventing gender-based violence, in terms of looking at their cultural practices or gender norms that they needed to change to make sure that the girls remain safe. So we are seeing a lot of improvement as we are working with traditional leaders and training the traditional leaders. I also just wanted to comment on sexual health. I think there was a question around sexual health. The sessions that the girls go through, I know Ambassador Biggs talked about in primary schools. It's indeed a challenge in schools. There's a curriculum, but you find that in schools sometimes the curriculum is not taught. But in the clubs where the girls meet, some of the sessions that they go through is around sexual health. So just understanding their bodies, talking about HIV prevention. We see that helps them to understand what their bodies and to understand their bodies and be able to understand, sexuality and things like that. So we are seeing the girls gaining quite a lot as they go through the sessions using the DREAMS toolkit that we have. Around income generation activities, for us, because we work with the girls in the clubs, those girls, some of the girls who are interested, they form a village and savings and loan groups. And once they save, they are able to get some loans and be able to start income-generating activities. Some are starting small businesses, and they are saving money out of that. So within that small scale, we see that the girls are also finding, help, or they are able to find some finances that it helps them within their families, and to also get the needs, some of the small things that they need within their lives.
Okay, we'll take a couple more questions, and then we'll have to close this up. Right here in the salmon, I think you call it. And then there are a couple in the back. Yeah. We'll take these three.
Thank you to the panelists for those great presentations. I think we're all really excited about the DREAMS program. My question was about the BRIGHT program. And I was curious about that. There were math assessments, and I think there were improvements in math scores, and I'm not sure if it was reading, but math scores. And I wanted to understand a little bit more about some of the activities or interventions around that supported those improvements, why you saw some of those improvements, just to understand that more. Thank you.
Okay. And then there are those two in the corner. Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Emmanuel Lamte. I work with PACT, and we are implementing DREAMS in 4 countries, Zambia, Malawi, Swaziland, and Tanzania. I have 2 quick questions. So one is on vocational training for girls. So we've been challenged to sort of think about alternatives to traditionally offered vocational courses like tailoring and catering for the girls. So we would love to hear any unique examples from elsewhere that resulted in self-employment or formal employment for these girls, particularly those girls that don't have sort of a secondary certificate. And the second question is around traditional leaders, but in this case, boys. So a lot of the focus is really around adults and girls, obviously, but the girls' peers seem to be an afterthought sometimes. So do we have any evidence-based packages for adolescent boys on how they contribute to prevention of HIV in adolescent girls and through their action and their behaviors and attitudes? Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Nikki Duncan. I work for Global Communities, and we are implementing DREAMS in Kenya and also starting in Rwanda. Just to go a little bit further on the conversation that we've been having around access to economic opportunity, one of the things that we're doing to innovate on the program is really to engage the local private sector and even other multinationals through a public-private partnership advisory committee to find ways to engage like a larger group around economic opportunity for vulnerable young women, and wanted to know if there are other examples from the other implementers or the other countries where the private sector, outside of obviously the funders of Dreams, have been engaged actively to actually facilitate those linkages.
My name's Onyeka Wabunya. I'm not associated with any organization. So I recently did research in Nigeria focusing on women's representation. And, so I had the opportunity to interview young women and men between the ages of 18 and 30. And so, kind of piggybacking off the gentleman that previously spoke, I was wondering, how your initiatives and programs have tried to bring in young boys into this conversation. At least what I found in Nigeria was that a lot of times, young boys are unable to, they are disconnected and they don't understand, why it's important to have women empowerment. They see all of these resources from organizations going to support women, but, in a society that might not have, that has gross disparities. And if you're a poor young boy, you don't necessarily, benefit in some ways that maybe upper class young men might benefit. And so, I'm wondering how your organizations fold these boys into the conversation in order to kind of make that continued impact.
Okay, thank you. So there's a question about Bright, a question about vocational training, self-employment, private sector, and then male engagement.
So really, quickly, it's always so fascinating to me about the men's and boys programs because PEPFAR always had men and boys programs from the very beginning, but no one ever asked me about the girls programs. And since 2009, we've had prevention for boys through circumcision and that dialogue, and no one asked me about women's programs and girls programs. So I think, it's always interesting how when you start something for girls, after you have long programs for boys, they come back and say, why don't they have your boys programs? It just shows how we do still have a bias when it comes to programming, but I think we recognize that there is a real need for young boys, and I think thank you for raising that because we have a team working right now to put together modules for young boys and men, and again with the male leadership, but really focus. If you looked at the data, young boys were having a lot of early sexual debut and a lot of gender-based violence themselves, and I think really figuring that out and not leaving them behind is really critical, and I think we were really lacking in boys programs for the 9 to 14-year-olds. And so when we talked about 9 to 14-year-old girls, we really wanted to have both men and boys questions together. I love the other questions because I don't have an answer. I see the team kind of shaking their head about private sector engagement in a local way. So I think they have an answer, and hopefully you can connect with them immediately afterwards because they're the subject matter experts. And I think the private sector has been really great for us. I think they've brought this segmentation to us. And then finally in Malawi, Girl Effects came from the Nike Foundation. They really, when you talk about other opportunities for girls, they really think girls can be leaders in coding and data use and getting out there and collecting government data. And so that's why we don't want to stop with hairdressing and tailoring, but we want opportunities within the tech world for women because we believe that if we went to the moon because of the women who were coding, that we could do anything, anywhere with women that are coding. But Girl Effects did involve boys and girls and data collection. It was very interesting because they said that the core issue in many of our communities is girls see themselves as sexual objects and boys see them solely as sexual objects. And there's no sense that you could have a friend relationship with the opposite sex. And so they're working on a whole program around building early young friendships between boys and girls. And I thought that was so fundamental, and no one had thought about asking how boys and girls view each other. So it was very fascinating, and I think really figuring out how to do better there will be really important to us.
All right, I'll just I'll answer just very briefly about Bright.
Sure.
Math scores did improve significantly for both boys and girls, but as I was saying, because girls were behind, it filled that gap, it closed that gap. The reasons for it are harder to tease out. I mean, certainly teacher training was a big part of the program, so that had to have had something to do with it. But then there was also the fact that girls would have more time for studying because they were spending less time taking care of their siblings or carrying water. There's also just the amount of attention. I mean, whenever you have a program that is girl-focused, it creates a whole discourse around the potential of girls, around the importance of girls studying, and so that creates more sort of incentive and interest among the girls. So there's a lot of different pieces that probably fed into the math scores. The problem with these multiple holistic programs that deal with so many different aspects of girls' lives. On the one hand, they work because they are holistic. On the other hand, it poses more of a challenge on the evaluation side to be able to have the power to tease out exactly what it is that led to a particular kind of outcome. But there is more on, if you're interested, I can share the evaluation with you, and if you'd like to learn sort of more about those different aspects that might have contributed.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk briefly based on my sort of consultation last week about, they talked a lot about vocational training and the importance of, you know, how impactful that was after their sort of transition from school. You know, you need some sort of training or something in order to, I talked about the story of the one girl who started her own business, and that was through trainings, and it was actually through a private sector partner that she got acquired sort of a lawyer services and marketing services in order to build her business. Another girl talked about how they were all involved in youth savings groups, and through that access to credit, they were able to increase their savings and sort of create a joint poultry business, which was a really great way for them to sort of, you know, increase their leadership and all of that. But yeah.
Did you have a last? No?
No.
Very well. Well, it just falls to me then to thank you all for coming. Thank PEPFAR, USAID, MCC, the Wilson Center, everyone who's involved with this. It's clear that DREAMS is working because it's a comprehensive program. It takes this comprehensive approach, and because it's listening to the young women themselves. And those are two tips I think we can all take away to improve our own work. So thank you very much, and the work continues.